Hi, my name's Gareth and I make videos helping people to get higher scores in the IELTS test. In this video, we're going to be looking at part 1 of the IELTS speaking test. Specifically, we'll look at 4 questions and 4 sample answers for this part of the test. And the topic we'll be looking at is the topic of walking. Now this is quite an odd topic, I guess, something you might not expect to have to talk about when you're in part 1 of the speaking test. But this is the kind of thing the examiner will do. They're going to ask you questions that you don't expect, just because they want to check that you haven't just memorized some set answers to questions about yourself. So that's why they're asking you on a random topic like this, walking. The answers that I'm going to show you will show you a very high level of English, the kind of answers that a Band 9 level student would give in the test. So what I want to do first is look at the 4 questions and have a think about what they're asking you. And then after that, we'll move on to look at the answers. And I'll give a quick analysis of why the answers are good and appropriate for part 1 of the IELTS speaking test. So first of all, let's look at those 4 questions. The first one is, do you like walking? Quite a simple question. It's very common in the IELTS test that you will get a do you like question followed by an activity. Here the activity is the topic the examiner is focusing on, walking. Do you like walking? That's the first one. Let's have a look at the second question. Do you think walking is important? So again, it's focused on the same topic, but it's this common style of IELTS question for part 1 of the speaking test. Do you think something is important? Here we've got the topic walking. Do you think walking is important? Let's move on to the third question. Do you think walking in the countryside is better than walking in the city? Now here the question is slightly more complex because it's asking you to compare something. Specifically here we're comparing walking in the countryside with walking in the city. Although this is quite a common style of question in part 1 of the speaking test. You don't really need to give a big long complex answer because it's just part 1, not part 3, but we're still having to compare. Do you think something is better than something else? And here it's walking in the countryside or walking in the city. So that's the third question. Let's have a look at the fourth question. What could be done to improve the experience of walking in cities? So again, not the easiest question here, and a lot of people get confused by this style of question, but it is very common in part 1 of the test. What could be done to improve something? Now this can be confusing because you could think, well, who is it talking about? Is it talking about me or someone else? And really here you have to make a quick judgment on who you think could actually do this. And in this case, it's probably the government who are going to improve the environment of a city. But a very common style of question here, so it's good to think about how you would answer a question like this. What could be done to improve something? And here the topic is the experience of walking in cities. So those are the 4 questions. What we want to do now is look at some sample answers that are good answers to these style of questions that we get in this part of the test. So let's go back to that first question and think about the answer. Do you like walking? I'm not one for going on really long walks in the countryside, but I don't mind walking when I'm in a town or city. For example, when I'm sightseeing in a new place. Do you think walking is important? Yes, I think it's important to be active, and walking is the most basic physical activity that we can do. Do you think walking in the countryside is better than walking in the city? Personally, no. As I said before, I like walking in the city, especially if it's somewhere with a lot of history like London or Paris. What could be done to improve the experience of walking in cities? I suppose the main issues are space and safety. Pavements need to be wide enough to accommodate lots of pedestrians, and we need safe places to cross the street. There we go. That's the end of the 4 questions and 4 sample answers. Hopefully you'll notice here that the answers are not too long. In fact, they're quite short. And really, it's best to keep your answers in part 1 of the test quite short and simple. There's no need to give big, long answers. Remember, these are short, simple questions that need short, simple answers. I'll often find students will be trying to impress the examiner, of course, in the test, and they'll give answers that are far too long in part 1. And the chances are, if you go on too long, the examiner will just interrupt you and force you to move on to the next question. You don't need to give long answers in part 1. The times when we're speaking at length in the IELTS speaking test is part 2 and part 3. That's where you get to speak at length. So all of these answers you can see are an appropriate length. They're either 1 or maybe 2 sentences. Let's have a look at that first answer to the question, do you like walking? We can see here I'm using some pretty good idiomatic vocabulary, and it's not so obvious what is idiomatic here, but the phrase I'm not one for. Now, this might look a bit strange to some people, but it means I don't really like. And instead of saying I don't really like, well, I'm not one for. It's quite a common idiomatic phrase that native speakers would use in day-to-day speech. So it's a good one to remember there. Then we go on to say I'm not one for going on long walks in the countryside. To go on a walk. Nothing amazing here, but we are using walk as a noun, and sometimes students will not know how to do this. We're using it with the phrasal verb go on, to go on long walks. So again, some nice language. It doesn't look that complex, but it's a high level of English. But then we compare a bit. We use the word but I don't mind walking when I'm in a town or city, and then we give a short example afterwards, when I'm sightseeing in a new place. The word sightseeing, of course, this is a gerund for an activity. It's what we do when we visit a new place and you go to see places that you've never seen before that are quite famous and popular. That is sightseeing, when I'm sightseeing in a new place. So there we go. A nice short simple answer, just 1 sentence there, but I think it's long enough not to require a second sentence. It's a bit more of a complex sentence there, so long enough. Let's move on to the answer to the second question, do you think walking is important? Now, when you look at this answer, it's nice and direct. We begin it with a clear yes. Do you questions kind of require this kind of yes or no answer. You don't have to answer like that, but it's good to bring focus to your answer and show the examiner you understand the question. And then a nice direct answer using words and grammar from the question. I think it is important. I think it's important to be active. We're just adding that detail there. Then we explain a bit more. And walking is the most basic physical activity that we can do. So it's nice and short and simple there, but it's making it clear that we do think it's important. So you're fully answering the question. Nothing too complex as far as vocabulary goes there, but it's just a nice, clear answer. Let's move on to the third question and the answer for that. The third question was, do you think walking in the countryside is better than walking in the city? So again, we start with a nice direct answer. Personally, no. So we're using that word no. Just to be clear that we've taken one clear side. Then after that, we've got a second sentence. That first sentence was really short, not long enough for an answer in the IELTS speaking test. We've got to remember we've got to give a long enough answer to show some skills in English. And here, the second sentence says, as I said before. Well, this is referring to your answer to the question previously. I like walking in the city. So we're referring to this. We're repeating something we said before, especially if it's somewhere with a lot of history like London or Paris. So we're making a kind of a nice direct answer here, and we're taking a side of walking in the city. Well, walking in the countryside is not better, in my opinion, to walking in the city. And then we explain a little bit why. Nothing too complex with the vocabulary here, but again, it's a nice, clear answer. Okay, let's move on to the fourth and final question and look at the answer for that. The question was, what could be done to improve the experience of walking in cities? Now we can see the answer here is 2 sentences. Here we've got, I suppose the main issues are space and safety. So here we're showing that we're not exactly sure by using the phrase I suppose, similar to I think, but again it's to show, well, we're not really sure, we're not an expert on this subject, but we suppose the main issues, the main things are space and safety, using nice 2 clear nouns for what the things that could be improved are. Then we've got a second sentence to explain those 2 things a bit more, space and safety. Pavements need to be wide enough to accommodate lots of pedestrians. So some nice vocabulary here. We got the word pavements. This is a synonym of sidewalks. It's the area next to the road for walking. And then we say, well, they need to be wide enough, kind of big enough. And then to accommodate. Accommodate here kind of means give access to, make it available for. And then we've got the word pedestrians. This means people who use the pavements or the sidewalks, people who walk on the street. They are pedestrians. We haven't finished there though. We need to talk not just about space, but also about safety. We need to explain that part of our answer. And we need safe places to cross the street. So nothing too complex there, we're just explaining safety. We're using the adjective form of safety there to show a bit of skill with vocabulary, the word safe, and just the verb cross, to cross the street, which means to go to the other side. So there we go, nothing majorly complex there, right? We're keeping it pretty simple, but we're showing off our fluency. We're showing that we understand what the question is asking, and we're not doing any more than just answering the question, keeping it nice and clear, never going more than 2 sentences with our answers. But again, they're not too short. You don't want to give really short 1 or 2 word answers. You've got to expand a bit in order to show those skills with your speaking in English. So that's it really. We've looked there at 4 questions and answers on the topic of walking, questions that are quite a common style for speaking part 1. You'll see there we've got these kind of types of questions like, do you like something? Or do you think something is important? Or do you think something is better than something else? And what could be done to improve something? Remember here the topic is walking. But of course, you can play with the topics and change the topic of walking to something else and practice answering questions like this on different topics. We don't know exactly what topic you're going to get in the test. We've got no idea really. There are hundreds of topics that could come up, but these are styles of questions that very often come up in the test. You're almost guaranteed to get a question which asks you, do you like, followed by some kind of activity. The more you practice answering these question styles, then the better you're going to get, and it doesn't really matter what topic you get in the test. Anyway, I hope this was useful for you to look at some sample answers and to think about these styles of questions. If it was useful, then don't forget to give the video a like, and if you haven't already, then remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any videos on similar topics in the future. There we go. Thanks for watching, and see you again in the next video.